So we're going to talk about Chodesh Nisan, we're going to talk about Pesach and all the good stuff. I actually heard a story. I feel like this happens every time. Maybe it's just that I'm more open to it, when I'm preparing for something and I'm thinking about it. But I always hear the exact story I need to hear. The day I'm giving a shiur, I always get the perfect thing that I need to hear. So today, somebody told me a story and I said, oh my goodness, I'm opening with this story because it's perfect. It's actually perfect. So there was a group of women who traveled, a group of women from Crown Heights who traveled to Detroit. There was a Neshei Chabad convention. So this was years ago. Are Neshei Chabad conventions still a thing? They still do it, I think. Well, now everything's virtual, but then it was like a big deal. The Neshei Chabad conventions were a big deal. So a group of women, I'm actually telling a story about your mother right now. Come on in. So a group of women went to the Neshei Chabad convention in Detroit, and they were in the airport on the way back. It was a Thursday afternoon. Do you know this, Norm? You know this? Were you part of it? No. So they're in the airport, and of course, everybody left husbands, babies, who knows what was going on back home. And they get to the airport, there's snowstorms, the planes are grounded, they're all in a panic, people are freaking out. So Miriam Swerdlove was in this group, and she called Maskiras and said, asked, can you please tell the Rebbe we need a bracha, we're stuck in the airport, and we need to get home for Shabbos. We left our families, we need to get home for Shabbos. So of course, this is before text, and cell phones. And so they wait a few minutes till they think it's enough time. And she calls again from the payphone, and she calls Maskir. She speaks to the Maskir, and he says, yeah, the Rebbe gave an answer. He says, I don't understand what the word stuck means. So she starts to explain, okay, so stuck means, says, no. The Rebbe knows what the word stuck means. What the Rebbe said was, I don't understand. You just went to this convention. You sat for days. You heard words of chizuk and amuna. You heard chassidus. You learned about hashgacha pratis. Now you find yourself in the airport. A yid is never stuck. A yid is never stuck. If you're in the airport, you're supposed to be in the airport. And once you finish doing whatever you have to do in the airport, you'll get home. And suddenly, everything changed. The whole attitude shifted. They went from this panic and feeling constricted, and we all know what that feels like, right? When you're at the red light and your babysitter needs to leave and your baby's at home and you're stuck and you feel like you're stuck, right? So they were in this stuck feeling, and suddenly everything changed. They reached into their bag, they found their neshek kits, they started running around the airport, doing shlichus and finding yidden and getting them to Ben Shlicht. It was already almost Erev Shabbos. It was perfect. Their whole mode changed. Of course, they got home. Baruch Hashem, everything worked out. But the idea that this one word, a yid is never stuck. Suddenly, they weren't stuck. Suddenly, everything changed. The Arizal says that the word Pesach is from the word Pesach, a mouth that speaks. The idea and everything about Pesach is about speaking, right? The idea of telling the story, everything about Pesach is about speaking. What does it mean? A mouth that speaks. How do we frame the story? How do we tell the story? The way we tell the story determines what the story is. This is what decides what the story is. So these words we all know. These beautiful words from Yirmiyahu, talking about how the Eibishter remembers how we ran after him into the Midbar with such pure love and trust and devotion. We did not have time to figure things out. We had no idea where we were going. We had no plan. We did not even let our bread rise, right? The dough was on our backs. We didn't even plan Seder Laderech. I mean, which Jewish mother goes on a trip into the desert without a bag of snacks? I mean, literally, the dough was still raw. And we ran after the Eibishter into the desert, into this forsaken land with such love. Chesed nurayich, avos kulasayich. The Eibishter says, I remember this tremendous love and devotion and emunah you had in me. And never forgets it. Every spring, Chodesh Ha'aviv, Hashem remembers this gift of our trust in him. How we followed him out, how with no conditions, no cheshbonos. And matzah is this bread, that is this bread of emunah, this bread that doesn't take time to figure things out, that doesn't have a plan. It doesn't have this whole process of becoming and developing. It is so simple. It's just the basic ingredients. And Hashem remembers this trust and this love, and he repays us. Every Chodesh Ha'aviv, he remembers and he brings it back to us. And he tells us, even if you're not there yet, even if you haven't reached that place and you haven't figured it out, my love and my emunah in you is equal to that love and emunah that you had in me. The Zohar tells us that matzah is michla de mnusa and michla de avsusa, de asvusa. I'm sorry, my Aramaic is not quite up to par.
You could have said whatever you wanted.
Yeah, I know, right? Or like, michla de shmashmushka. You're like, right, okay, all right. So, it is michla de mnusa, the bread of emunah, and it is michla de asvusa, it is the bread of healing. And in Hayom Yom, the Rebbe talks about this idea that the Alter Rebbe says that the first night of the Seder, the matzah is the bread of emunah, and the second night of the second Seder is the night where matzah is the bread of healing. And why in this order? Because if you first have the sickness and you have the healing, right? And then you have the emunah. Hashem healed me. I feel good now. I believe Hashem is the healer. You were still sick. There was still the sickness. When you start off with emunah, when you start off with nichla de mnusa, when you start off with the bread of faith, then even if there's sickness afterwards, it's not looked at as sickness. The healing is already there within the sickness when you start from a basis, from a foundation of emunah. You ever heard the quote, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional?
Oh, good.
It's out there, but it's a quote I really like. I tend to use it a lot. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And I think as women, anybody who's ever given birth, we are very aware that there's a difference between pain and suffering. When the pain is for a positive purpose, when we know that there is something amazing that's going to happen at the end of that pain, that there's going to be life, it's not considered suffering. It might be very painful, but it's not suffering. You know, there's vei and then there's oy vei, right? Vei means tutvei, it hurts. It could hurt, but suffering is optional. If we turn the vei into oy vei, that's our choice. When we can see anything that's happening now as ikvasa de meshichas, we could see it as the birth pangs. We could see it as up, we're about to come to this point when there's new life, when there's rebirth. We're entering into a state of geula. The Rebbe was so good at this. Everything that happened in the world, he managed to fit it into this puzzle, into how this is, we're just about to see Mashiach. This is just part of the pain. And when you could see every pain as part of the process towards birth, towards creation, towards new life, suddenly it's pain, but it's not suffering. It's a whole different thing. There's actually a very nice, I heard this, someone asked Rebbetzin Rochie PInson years back. He said to him, I don't understand how it's possible that the second generation after these immigrants came to the Lower East Side, they gave up everything for Yiddishkeit. They gave up everything. They lived in such squalor, such poverty. Every week to week, they lost their job because they wouldn't work on Shabbos. They had to get another job. Such mesiras nefesh, how they suffered for Yiddishkeit. How is it possible that the second generation is assimilating and is not following in the parents' footsteps? And it's fine. And he answered, These parents walked around saying, "Ay, es ist schwer zu sein, Yid." Exactly. Es ist schwer zu sein, Yid. Ay, they lost the job. Ay, es ist schwer zu sein. And really, who wants to be a part of that? I mean, there's parties going on out there, you know? If this is what Yiddishkeit is, it's the suffering and it's today. Let's look for joy somewhere.
There's a story I had a story about family.
We're on Zoom, so I just want to make sure it's fine. It's fine. We'll say either we have to hear you or we'll save it for the end. So save it for the end and tell it us because I actually want to hear it. I can always use more material. Thank you. Save it for me. Okay. So how do we enter into Pesach? You know, it's really, there's no way around it. Making Pesach is hard work. I can actually say that now because I made Pesach for the first time last year. It took me 25 years. And I finally it took a pandemic, but I had to make Pesach. And yes, it's hard work. There's no way around it. It is a job. It is a lot to do. And the question is, how do we go into it with the right frame of mind? How do we go into it with joy? How do we not approach it with oivei, with this schwer zu sein, this is miserable, but okay, this is what I have to do. How do we go into it? Let's look at how the whole Seder begins. How do we start off the Seder? We start off the Seder with Kiddush, right? Not only the father makes Kiddush, but the whole family gets up together, makes Kiddush at the Seder. This is how we begin the Seder. We begin the Seder with Gadlus. What are the words that we say in the Kiddush? Asher bachar banu mikal v'raimanu mikal asharim v'kiddishanu b'mitzvayso. We talk about that we're loved, that we're chosen, that we were handpicked, goy mikerav goy. We were taken out, one nation from amongst another nation. And who took us out? The Eibishter himself, la yalidei malach, la yalidei saraf, la yalidei shaliach, right? Ani Hashem, ani v'lai acher. I took you out myself. This is how we begin. We begin the Seder in a state of pure godless. Kings and queens at our Seder. This is how we start off. And then, we start talking about the tzaras. Avadim ayinu, and we were slaves and our ancestors worshipped idols. We talk about the little problems along the way. But once you come from that space of godless, once you're already in that mode of, I am the king, I'm the queen in my castle, it's a whole different story. The way we talk about it is a whole different thing. We are in a state of godless. And I was thinking that this is maybe a hard concept to get across. And I thought of a funny story. I don't know if it's a funny story to share here, but it really, to me, illustrates this point. So I'll share it with you. And everybody else who's watching on Zoom. So I think it looks like is the video recording, actually? Did you ever press record? Okay, it's fine.
I did.
It's fine.
That's what I was
Oh,
afraid of.
okay.
Not
Okay,
enough swords.
it's fine. All good. So my husband and I were invited years ago. Yeah, this is recording. It's fine. My husband and I were invited to a birthday party. It was a little bit of an unusual birthday party. The birthday boy, had money to spare. So we all went to his birthday party on his plane. And his plane was actually a plane that he owned. It was part of the airline that he owned. So it wasn't like a private plane. It was a commercial, like a 747 that's meant for hundreds of people, just like a big plane. And there was how many of us, 25, 30 of us on this plane. So this is the very funny thing that happened. You get on the plane and all the people who don't usually fly first class ran to the first class seats. They were so excited. They're sitting in first class. Meanwhile, there's a whole empty plane. The birthday boy, this is his plane. This is his airline. He happily goes to the back of the plane. There's empty seats galore, stretches himself out. He's happy. So this is the difference, when you own the plane. When you could fly first class, whatever you want, you could fly private, you could take the whole jumbo jet for all anyone cares. It doesn't make a difference. You're sitting in the front, you're sitting in the back, you have the first class seat, you have the captain seat. Who cares? You own the plane. And that's the idea of coming to issues in life from a place of godless. Are you, the person flying on points who's like cricking and trying to get into that first class? Or do you own the plane? It's a whole different game. This is how we come into Pesach. We own the place. We own the place. We are kings and queens at our Seder and our castle. This is our Mishkan. This is our castle that we're creating this space for Pesach. The Rebbe speaks about how Yetzias Mitzrayim created a paradigm of existential freedom, wherein each Yid is free, existentially free, whatever happens to us in our long history. And there's many times when it didn't look like we were very free. We are always free. We are now a free people. And whatever we decide to do with that freedom, how we decide to use that freedom, the choices we make come from ourselves. Once we came out of Mitzrayim, we were never able to be a slave again. That was it. Slavery is not part of our story. There's a beautiful story with the Frierdiker Rebbe when he came out of prison and he was being sent to Kostroma, right? And he was going on the train, and a group of Chassidim came to say goodbye to him. And he spoke to them then, and part of what he spoke to them, he said, you should know and tell the world this, that you can put a Yid's body in prison, but the neshama of a Yid can never be in prison. The neshama of a Yid is free. And no matter what a person does, we always come from that place of freedom, no matter what a person wants to do to you. And when we ourselves feel enslaved, we feel trapped, we feel forced into our responsibilities. We become smaller, we become angrier, a little more frustrated with the hard work. It's all about how we approach it. Are we stuck in the airport? Or are we in the airport because we've been given this amazing opportunity? If we feel like we're enslaved, then we're talking suffering. Then we talk and make ourselves into slaves. But if we can come to it from a place of chayros, if we can come to everything in life from a place, a geuladik perspective, a perspective of that we're in a space where we have choice to live as a free person, then somehow from this space of ashreinu matayv chalkeinu, everything can be joyful. Everything is possible and manageable too. Not just joyful, but manageable. Somehow, when it's your story and you're choosing it, it's manageable. No matter how much there is to do, and no matter how big the task is, when it's your choice and your joy, you manage it, right? People ask these women who are doing everything, and I'm looking around at a table of people like this, how do you do it? How do you do it? It's your story. You do it. You manage, because this is your responsibility. This is your story that you've chosen. Nisan is a month of pure Isarusa de La'ela. What's happening in this month, the light of the Eibishter is coming into this world in the most pure and direct and perfect way. This is the 1 month of the year that is pure Isarusa de La'ela, divine energy coming down. We don't need any output. I know it feels like we do a lot of output, but the truth is that the inner avodah of Pesach, of Nisan, is really a passive avodah. It's the avodah of getting ourselves out of the way, letting go. And I know some people think that's actually the hardest avodah, and it is, but it's a passive avodah. Understanding, it really comes from an attitude. It comes from the way we understand it. The Rebbe speaks about Chodesh HaAviv, a time of rebirth, as a time that we re-express, that we find something within ourselves that may have been lying dormant this whole year. Through the cold of the winter, the harsh winter, sometimes it looks like things are dead. We look at the ground, it's frozen over. How can anything grow? It looks dormant, it looks dead. And then spring comes and suddenly there's a bud. And I don't know if anybody saw today, but I saw first buds of spring in my backyard, and it brought me a lot of joy. And just that knowledge that everything is reborn. And the Rebbe talks about it as our emunah comes back to life in Chodesh HaAviv. That sometimes we think it's not there, but we are, as Yidden, we are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. It's in our DNA. It never leaves us. Sometimes it's dormant a little bit. Sometimes it's a little bit underground. But Chodesh HaAviv comes, and suddenly there's rebirth and there's hope. And suddenly we find that emunah that maybe we were struggling with before. The light and energy, the geula energy that's in Nisan is really ours to absorb and receive. The only thing we have to do is get ourselves out of the way. It's like if you think about a baby, right? A newborn baby. They don't have to do anything. They don't ask for their food. They don't ask for the love and the cuddles and the hugs and they get it. They just be their cute, delicious selves, and we give it to them. We want to give them everything they need. That's really how we are in the month of Nisan. We are like this newborn nation again. Hashem remembers again how we came with him in this trusting way, just like a baby. And Hashem gives us the brachas. He's waiting to give us the brachas. When the Rebbe spoke, I think it was like in the Klali address, the general address for Pesach, when the Rebbe spoke about this, and he spoke that the Eibishter is good. The Eibishter is tov, and teva hatov lehetiv. The nature of good is to give good, is to do good. The Eibishter only wants to shower us with good, only wants to give us good. He's waiting to pour the shafa and the bracha on us. We just need to be ready to receive it. Sometimes, and this is also here another birth parallel, but I really find, the last class I gave actually in Adar, I had actually a doula in the class. It was great. Every birth parallel, she was jumping on it. It was great. But it's definitely, when the thing they tell you when you're trying to give birth, they say you have to loosen up, right? You have to just relax because this is going to come through you. You just have to let it happen. And sometimes when we get into the state of constriction or our own Mitzrayim, our own Mitzrayims, our own stuckness, we tighten up. We don't allow it. We think we're asking for these brachas that we need. And sometimes we just need to let go a little bit. We just need to let loose and allow the brachas, believe that these brachas are there. They're waiting to come into our lives if we just make some room for them. So talking about making room and being too full of stuff to make room, let's talk about chametz for a minute. So if anybody here is making Pesach, anyone making Pesach? Yeah? You're like, is there another option? I'm getting looks here. Right. So everybody has chametz on their mind right now. This is like the thing that's on our mind. So really, it's such a crazy thing. Like, what's the big deal about chametz? The whole year, we eat chametz. It's not treif. Some people think gluten is a problem, but it's not treif. We eat chametz day in, day out. I'm not good at math, so I can't calculate, but minus 8 days out of 365. You'll come up with a number, how many days we're eating chametz. And then suddenly these 8 days, chametz becomes this pariah. It becomes the worst thing ever. It's aser b'mashahu. It's bal yira, bal yamatza. You can't see it. You can't find it in your house. It's not batal b'shishim. Even pig is batal b'shishim. You can faster eat a piece of pig that got lost in your vat of chicken soup than one speck of chametz. What is it with this chametz that's so dramatically awful? The only other thing in the Torah that has the same aser b'mashu and bal yira, bal yamatza is avodah zarah. Avodah zarah. It's the only thing.
I said gaiva.
Gaiva. Well, that's chametz, right? So the only other thing is avodah zarah, and really that's what chametz is. If you think about it, where did this idea of rising come, and I know I wrote a book by that title, and it's not a Pesach book. But where does this start, this rising? Actually, this idea of rising dough started in Egypt. They were the first people to discover this process of rising dough and making bread. Till then, everything was like, like the flatbreads of, like you think about the Middle Eastern flatbreads, that they pitas, like that, they took dough and water and they baked it. Who had time to think about it? And suddenly this was like the sophisticated culture, and they were rising the dough and giving it time. And look what could happen. Sourdough, amazing things can happen. And what was the culture of Mitzrayim? This was a culture that was steeped in idol worship. They were the ultimate, the lowest of the low when it comes to idol worship. So chametz starts to represent this idea of avodah zarah. Chametz represents ego. It represents inflammation. And ego is not a bad thing. Ego is what keeps us alive. It's what tells us to feed ourselves breakfast when we're starving, and what tells us to look both ways before we cross the street. We need it for our survival. The problem is when there's an over inflammation of that ego. It's something that happens. It's a buildup over time. And over the whole year, the inflammation builds. With healing, anything in medicine, they always say the first cause of illness is inflammation, right? And if you ever want to heal anything, the first thing you have to do is get rid of the inflammation. Because when there's inflammation, you can't see what's what. You have no idea what's going on. You can't even find the sickness in the body if there's so much inflammation. The inflammation conceals everything. What happens when our ego starts to get we start to get a little bit too wrapped up in our own story. And this is not about a healthy sense of self-worth. I'm not talking about knowing your place in the world and thanking Hashem for your talents and your abilities and understanding what you have to contribute and making sure you do your role. That's all part of a healthy sense of self. But what happens sometimes when we get too wrapped up in our own story, and this happens, I think, to everyone. I know this story myself. Someone doesn't answer your phone call, right? You send a message and they don't answer the call. Suddenly we have stories going on. Stories and stories. They answer my call, they're insulted, they're hurt. I said something, I did something, maybe I looked at them funny, they looked at me funny, we make the whole stories. Suddenly it becomes all about ourselves and everything that's going on in our own world. Meanwhile, I don't know, the person had a doctor's appointment, they have their own stuff going on. We get so in our own story sometimes, we can't see past the end of our own nose. And that's when the inflammation starts, the ego starts to become opaque. And we can't see through, we can't see. And the Eibishter says about a person with gaiva, a person whose ego is so big and taking up so much space, Ein ani v'hu yichalim lador sham. He and I cannot exist in the same place. There's no room for me. There's no room for the Eibishter when we're so involved in our own story, in what's going on in our own lives. There's no room for the Eibishter, no room for another person, never mind. There's no room for the Eibishter. There's no room for us to accept the brachas that are waiting to come into our lives. There's no room. First, we have to make some space. We get rid of the chametz. We're making space. Literally, physically, we're clearing out the chametz. And emotionally, we are letting space into our lives. Chametz and matzah are almost the exact same word, right? The difference is the ches and the hay. And if you think about it, the difference between the ches and the hay is literally a poke. You give a little poke in the ches and it turns into a hay. It's literally that tiny little dot is the difference between chametz and matzah. You make that little hole and suddenly everything changes. The ches of chametz is a letter that's closed off on the top. Like a person without emunah, or a person whose emunah, let's say, is dormant at the moment. When we live in a state of anxiety and worry, what's happening next? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? How can I control the situation? How can I make sure this happens? We forget to look up. The ches, it's closing off the roof and we don't see where everything is coming from. You have to make a little hole. We have to puncture that hole in the chametz. And suddenly with matzah, suddenly it opens up and there's an opening and you look up and you understand, I'm not in control of everything. As a matter of fact, we're not in control of anything. Let's get real. We're not in control of anything. And if we thought we were before a pandemic, we know now, we definitely know we are not in control of anything. And this is the lesson of chametz. This is the lesson of matzah. This is the big deal. What's the letter Hey? It's so different than Ches. So different. The letter Hey, our Chachamim tell us, the Hey Nivra Ha'olam. The whole world was created with the letter Hey. Hey is a letter of silence. It's a letter of rest. It's a letter of Hallel and Haidah. It's a letter of humility. It's a letter of Emunah. And through that, all of creation occurs. Hey is breath, and breath is the beginning of sound. And sound is how creation occurs, right? Sound is the beginning of speech, and speech is how the world comes into being. So Hey, that tiny nakuda of Emunah, that bit of humility and Emunah, is the root of everything that comes into our life. It's the root of everything that is in life. It's the root of everything that's going to be created. And how do we get to it? From a place of Emunah, from a place of just looking at the big picture, not so into what's going on in our own little selves. David HaMelech says, Esa einai al haharim ma'ayin yavai ezri. I look up at these mountains. They look insurmountable. They look so huge. How am I going to get over these challenges? They look like mountains to me. Me'ayin yavai ezri. It's a question. Where is my help going to come from? But also it's the answer. Me'ayin yavai ezri. My help actually comes when I can go into a state of ayin. When I'm in a state of ayin, from there, suddenly everything becomes a little bit easier. When I can go into a place where my ego is not taking up, mamash the opposite of chametz, which is yeshus. Ayin is the idea of letting go, making space, recognizing that there is this whole, we ran into the midbar, this place of possibility where nothing's growing, where everything is still in a realm of possibility. When we can get back into that place, everything is possible. Even the biggest mountains, the biggest challenges, when we can approach it from a place of emunah and bitachon, everything becomes scalable. It all comes down to scale. When Yaakov and Esav meet up after all these years, right? These two brothers and all this family drama, everything's going on. They finally meet up. They have a lot of catching up to do. How do they describe, how do they tell each other about their lives? It's very telling. Esav says to Yaakov, right? Yaakov, Yeshli Rav. Yeshli Rav, I have so much. Yaakov wants to give him gifts. He says, brother, I have so much. I have tons of stuff. I have stuff and stuff and stuff. What does Yaakov tell Esav? Yeshli Kol. He says, I have everything. You're giving the next year, by the way. Right? I think she knows everything I'm saying. He said, Yeshli Kol. I have everything. So what's the difference? He says, I have a lot. That's a beautiful thing to say. So the difference is, you know the difference when you walk into your closet and you know where I'm going with this. We obviously have the same closet. And it's accumulated over years and years. Like, what was I even thinking when I bought this? What was I, just like the aspirational clothing, the impulse buys, the stuff that's been sitting there that went out of style, came back in style already. And you walk into your closet and you can't even see what's what. There's so much in there. And you stand in front of it and you say, I have nothing to wear, right? Do we know? And the husband say, what? I have nothing to wear. You look at this closet that's so packed. You can't see things for what they are. You think you have nothing. Then you go and you finally clean it out. Erev Pesach, you start schlepping the bags, the garbage bags out, and you take this out and you walk into your closet and you literally have the 5 things, the 2 skirts you end up wearing every day anyways, the only pair of shoes you actually like, the 1 top, doesn't matter how many things, you'll pull that out of wherever it is in the pile. You have the 5 things in your closet and you know exactly what to wear. You know exactly, it's so clear. You feel like, Yeshli Kol, I have everything I need. That's the difference. This excess that accumulates over time, this is our chametz. This stuff we're building up, it takes too much of our brain space. It takes too much of the space in our lives. And I'm speaking to some people here who have no clutter in their lives. So you're going to have to think of emotional clutter because I know there's no clutter in your house. So we're not even going to go there. But there's also other stuff. We have to let go, not just the physical. The physical is to get us to the place, this feng shui, the whole Chinese art of arranging your house. They have also this concept that clutter in the house leads to clutter in the mind. And we all know, there's that corner in your house with like those boxes that have to be returned. Come on, sometimes there's cleaner stuff that didn't get to the cleaners. Okay, thank you. So, and you know how like every time you walk out of the house, it like bothers you. It's taking up brain space. It's taking up mental space. So physical stuff actually does translate, but it's not just the physical chametz and the excess. Remember that dirt is not chametz. And our children are not a carbon Pesach, right? We've all heard this one. Very important to remember. So even though we're talking about organizing and we're talking about cleaning out stuff, if your junk drawer didn't get cleaned out before Pesach and you tape it up, still Pesach. It's all good. Just have to like put that out there. Close some doors for your sanity. But if we want to allow good to come into our lives, if we want the good stuff to come in, we have to let go of some of the other stuff that's not so good. The stuff that's keeping us stuck. Sometimes it's grudges. Sometimes it's anger, hurt, disappointment, things that we hold on and it keeps us stuck. We can't move forward. We want good stuff to come in, but there's no space. We got to let go of that stuff. We have to understand what's not in our control and we have to let it go. That is entering into a space of ayin, getting rid of our personal comments. Right? So that's why we have to have Pesach every single year. We have to keep doing it. We haven't gotten there yet. This is the final year, l'chaim, everybody. This is the final year. Next year, the Kaihanim in the Beis Hamikdash can worry about the shmutz. So when we hold on to our anger, and what is anger really? Anger is ego. Anger is ego. Things should be a certain way. People should speak to me a certain way. I should be given this certain covet. This should happen. It's all ego. You're literally sitting in a pile of chametz. So we have to let it go. If we really believe with emunah, if we access this place of emunah, that everything is min hashamayim, and everything is part of the plan, and everything is teva hatoiv laheitiv. The Eibster wants to give us good. It's all part of a plan. We are a piece of a very beautiful puzzle that's being built. And if we can remember that, then we can let go of the stuff that didn't go the way we thought it should. Because obviously, we're not stuck in the airport. We're supposed to be exactly where we are. Every single story that happened to us is exactly part of our journey. And these are our Mitzrayim. These are our own Mitzrayim, our personal Mitzrayim. The Chol Dar V'Dar Chayav Adam. It's not a one-time thing. Every single generation we tell the story. It's not history. It's our story. It is the story of our own lives, and we have to relate it to what are our Mitzrayim. What can we let go of to make space for real newness? And if we want the Nisim that we know are coming in Nisan, which is the month of Nisim, Nisim. If we want those Nisim, we have to let go. We have to understand that we're not in control. Because if we think we're pushing the buttons and we're pulling the levers, the Eibush says, go ahead, you want to try it? You want to try and push those buttons? You want to figure out how to do this yourself? No. The Eibush might have a different way of doing it than we had planned, but his way is definitely the right way. So we need to give up. We need to give up this control. We need to give up this sense that we are controlling the situation and understand the bigger picture. And that's when the Nisim come in. But Pinchas of Karet says something beautiful. He says that the very act of emunah in Nisim is such a ness that we have faith that there could be a miracle, is such a miracle that this miracle brings out all the other miracles. So the only miracle we need to do is have the emunah that there can be a miracle. We have that emunah, and it suddenly opens up this miraculous energy, and all the miracles come pouring in. Like Nachshon ben Aminadav, right? He went into a space of ayin. He gave up walked into the water, and that was the miracle that created the miracles. That letting go of the self created all the miracles. And I was reading a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a chassid who was writing him to complain that he was very worried and had a lot of anxiety. And the Rebbe said, it's clear to us, we know already, this is known, that the solution for worries is bitachon. We need to cultivate our bitachon. And it is actually essential. It's one of the principles of Jewish faith, is emunah and bitachon, and it's not far from us. We are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. This is part of who we are. We just need to re-access it sometimes. We need to believe that it's there. Maybe it's buried deep, but like we said today, we're defrosting. We're all starting to defrost, and hopefully the emunah is going to pour forth as everything warms up. So our final geula, the one that we are begging for right now, we really need it, begins, and the Rebbe kept trying to impress this on us. He kept trying to tell us this. The geula starts with us. The general geula that's going to happen in the world, it starts with a personal geula. It starts with all of us living from a place of geula, all of us living in a place of cheres. When we are living, you know that story, the famous story with Reb Mendel Vitebsk, you know the story. Come on, you know the story. He was saying, once I tell you the story, you'll know the story. He was sitting in his study and they came running to him and they said to him, Mashiach came. And he opened the window and he looked outside and he sniffed the air and he goes, no. He said, why do you have to open the window? Because in his study where he was sitting, Mashiach was there already. And this is really, it's not a story. It's true. We can live in a place. The Rebbe was begging us to just open our eyes. He said, just open your eyes and you will see that Mashiach is here. We all have the possibility to live in this space of geula, to live in the space of expansiveness and freedom, to be the kings and the queens that we know we are. We all have this capacity. We just have to let go of our gullus. We have to believe that we are free people, that we are already able to be in a place of geula. I don't know if we all believe it. This is not drudgery. This work that we're doing for Pesach, even though a lot of it is a mess and it's hard work, this is our beautiful, precious, holy avodah, bringing Pesach into a home, bringing it into the world, creating this space of Pesach for our families. We are the queens of our little kingdom. When we create, what are we creating? And it's hard sometimes when you're working so hard and your back hurts and you're tired and you can't even believe that this is all you've gotten done and there's so much left to do and there's 2 weeks to Pesach. But actually just realized that today. I think I'm a little late. This would usually be when I'm in geula mode. This is usually when I'd be packing my suitcases, to go to have my mother make Pesach for me. So now this is a new reality. I'm making Pesach. I am making Pesach. It's for real. So right now, I'm not talking to you guys, by the way. I'm talking to myself. I was like, if this doesn't get me going, it's not worth anything. I heard something beautiful. Somebody once asked the Rebbe, they were passing by in dollars, and they had a question for the Rebbe. They said, I don't understand. You have this beautiful esrog that you bought yourself for Sukkot. You took so much time choosing this perfect esrog. It shouldn't have one speck on it, not one bruise. Like you wanted a pre-Eitz Hadar. You wanted the most, and then you go and you give it to thousands of people to bench full of an esrog. What do you think is going to happen to this esrog? It's not going to be mahudar. Your esrog is going to be shot. By the time everybody squishes it and mushes it, it's going to be bruised and it's going to have who knows what on it. How is this mahudar? And the Rebbe said, that's when my esrog becomes mahudar. When it is bruised and used and abused, that's when it is truly an esrog that is mahudar. So, when you're knee deep in a mess and in the shmutz, which I call the shmutz diktusha, right? The shtus diktusha, the shmutz diktusha. Try to remember that the Kohanim, I'm going to try and remember this too, that the Kohanim, by the end of the day, were standing in their beautiful white big day kahuna, knee deep in blood and guts. And I don't even want to describe the messes in our house. Do not compare, hopefully, do not compare to what they were dealing with. And they discussed this in Gemara. There's this question asked, like, how is this appropriate? Like, these are Kohanim. How is it appropriate that they're standing knee deep in this disgustingness and then blood and who knows what else. How is this actually appropriate? And they respond that this blood is the blood of the carbon. These are the blood of the carbonis. And shevachu lebnei Aaron, sheyelchu ad arkvoseihem b'dam. It is a shevach. This is the praise of bnei Aaron. This is the praise of the Kohanim, that they stood in the shmutz till their knees. This is where they became holy. This is where they got their holiness. This is the shmutz de kedusha. This week's parsha, actually, we're talking about the Mishkan and building the Mishkan. If you have to go, don't feel bad.
No.
Oh. Oh.
Is
it pain or is it suffering?
They're all chairs.
Oh, it could be. Sit lower. Sit lower. Sit lower. Not us. Not us. Not us. Okay. So this week we're building the Mishkan, and there's this amazing Rashi, right? The women come with their copper mirrors, right? They come with the copper mirrors, and they give it with their whole hearts. And Rashi says this story. Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eibishter, I don't know if this is so appropriate. Like, I don't know if these mirrors, they're in the bedroom. They're like, I don't know if these are the copper mirrors that the women brought for the Mishkan. And Moshe says, I don't know if I should use these. And the Eibishter says, not only should you use these, but you're going to make the kiyar out of these, where the kohanim are going to become tahar through this water in the kiyar from these mirrors. That's how holy. Torah lo b'shamayim hu. Torah is not meant to be practiced by malachim. We are the ground troops. We are doing the Eibishter's work right here in real time. This is the holy work that we are doing in the shmutz, in the work, in the cooking, in the tiredness. This is where we are becoming that pre-Eitz Hadar. You have to remember this. On Rosh Hashanah, we blow the shofar, and there's like a Rashi Tevis, there's an acronym that you make out of Tkiya, Shvarm, Trua, Tkiya, and it's Kashrak. She knows everything. Okay. So Tkiya is a tough, but it's represented by the Kuf. So it's Kashrak. So the Bedichev says, what is the Kashrak? There's a Kashrak also in Pesach, he says. All right, tell us, because you'll probably say the Yiddish even better than me. Kratzen, Scheiben, Reiben, Kochen, scraping, rubbing, shining, cooking. This is the Kashrak of Pesach. And he says, and I love anything from the Bedichev, I'm going to love, because the Bedichev just such beautiful compassion. And I feel like everything that comes out of his mouth was so beautiful. He says the Kashrak of Pesach is holier and achieves more than the Tkiya Shvarm Trua Tkiya in Rosh Hashanah. The Kratzen, the Reiben, the Sheiben, whatever the Kratzen we can say, the Kochen, it's holier. That work is going to achieve more than blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So just to end up, today is Chav Zayin Adar. Thought we should mention that. And one of the Rebbe's final messages to us was that Mashiach is already here. And just open your eyes, please, and see it. And again, the general Geula is going to begin with our personal Geula. It's going to begin with each one of us opening our eyes and truly feeling like we're in a space of Geula, like we're already in a time of Mashiach and living Mashiach for real. There's an argument in Gemara. There's an argument. Am I making it worse for you?
No, making us want to stay.
Oh. There's this argument in the Gemara. There's a lot of arguments in the Gemara. There's an argument in the Gemara. Are we going to still talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim after the final Geula? When Mashiach comes, are we still going to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim? Is it going to be even relevant? We already had the ultimate Geula. What are we going to talk about the first Geula? Does it even count anymore? And it's back and forth, of course, and back and forth. And let's skip ahead 10 pages. And yes, we are going to speak about Yetzias Mitzrayim in the time of the final Geula. So the Maharal gives, and the Rebbe actually has a whole sikha about this. And the Maharal gives a mashal to explain this. He says, if you build a beautiful building, you start off with the foundation, right? In the beginning, all it is the foundation. And then you build a story on top of it, and another story on top of it, and another story, another story. You don't see the foundation anymore, but the foundation is there. And the rest of the building would not exist without that foundation. That foundation is always relevant. And actually, when I heard this, I was thinking that I want to just mention that Mirala is sponsoring tonight's cheer, hosting it, let's say. She's like, sponsoring? I didn't know anything about sponsoring. Yeah, it's only like $1,500. She's hosting tonight's cheer in memory of her mother, Allah Shalom, whose birthday it is tonight. And when I heard this teaching from the Maral, this mashal, I thought that it's so perfect, especially as we go into Pesach, we're making Pesach. And the fact that this home that we're in right now, that there's an Akeres Habayis, there's a foundation. The mother that even is not there right now, that you don't see, that foundation is always present. And every generation that's built, generation after generation that's built on top of that foundation is all resting on that Akeres Habayis, is all resting on that foundation. Everything comes from that place. And you might not see it. You won't see it. And the more generation, the more time goes, you don't, but you know it's there. And you never stop remembering, because that's what's holding everything up. And when we start making our own Pesach, be it 1 year into marriage, be it 25 years into marriage, I figure by the time there's grandchildren coming, I should be making Pesach. At this point, you realize what you're creating something that's for generations. What is the Pesach that we want to create for our children? What is the Pesach we want our children to feel when they're sitting around the Seder? Do we want them to feel the oivei, or do we want them to feel that they are kings and queens in their castle? And when they make their own Seder for their children, they're passing on this attitude, this feeling of Pesach that we're giving towards them. What are we giving? How can we enter into Pesach this year in a state of geula, in a state of joy, feeling free and lucky and grateful that we have the opportunity to make Pesach, to create a Pesach that will be a foundational Pesach. So I'll end off just, the Rebbe used to give Dr. Seligson, he used to give him every year a matzah before Pesach. And one year he told him, come back tomorrow night, the second Seder, I want to give you another matzah. So Dr. Seligson said, I know in Hayyim Yaim, you write from the Alter Rebbe that the first night, he was showing his knowledge of Hayyim Yaim, that the first night is the lechem of emunah, and the second is the lechem of healing. And the Rebbe said, in truth, the matzah on both nights is the bread of healing. The healing is throughout. When you have emunah, it's all healing. And as we prepare for Pesach this year, we know that the matzah and the preparations for the matzah are going to give us the emunah and the bitachon that we need to rise above our challenges, to see them as opportunities rather than they, and to bring healing to all who need it. The world needs a lot of healing right now. And in Mr. Shem, the matzah that we have both nights should both be emunah, should both be healing, and should really bring the world into a state of the final geula and galus forever. And this should be a kosher Pesach, for real, for real.